How's it going?
Hey. What's up, brother?
Appreciate it, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great today, man. Thanks for asking.
Oh, awesome, awesome. I appreciate you taking the time to come on, man. I've been into the Weck stuff for a while, and I know that you're like, are you an instructor for it, or were you instructing it?
Yes, yeah. So I've been affiliated with David and Weck Method more closely over the last 2 years, and more so as just a personal practice over the last five. And so I've developed a level of skill within the system and competency in coaching where I could run some of their seminars and certify other coaches with Weck Method. But currently, I'm really focusing on a way that I could blend like what is ET strength as Edward and how it all does point back to Weck method truly. And then how I can also integrate remaining very closely tied with David and Chris and all those guys
Cool.
in the actual Weck method system. So a
Are
little
you
bit of
ever
both. Yeah.
you ever down here in SoCal? You ever go to the lab?
I used to live in Arizona and I was just a short drive away from them, but
Short
now I'm
drive.
in four hours for me, bro, is nothing, trust me.
It's
So
Vegas.
yeah, yeah. So I'm now in North Carolina, so I don't get there as often as I'd like, but try and make it there a few times a year if I can.
Nice. So I want to dive into obviously a lot of stuff WEC, and I want to see, your own spin on stuff. But figure first, maybe we could just kind of go over your background a little bit. Where are you from originally?
So I grew up on Long Island.
And I'm sorry, Edward. Do you say your last name is it Troy? Is that right?
Troyes, Troyes.
Edward Troyes. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So
What
like the
is that? Is that
word
French?
So yeah, funny story. It's actually Italian and it has been mispronounced toi, but toi doesn't have the e on the end. So, and anyone that has ever called me that, they've either maybe they learned French in high school or they just didn't recognize it. But yeah, my last name's been butchered my whole life, but it's tr like the word choice, but with tr in the front.
Oh, well, that's what I would think, but I would think that'd be wrong,
That's fine. Maybe that's why everyone it was always like Troisi or Troisi or Trozy or Trios. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, Edward Troyes. That's me.
Awesome. So I'm sorry, you grew up where did you grow up? Where are you from
Yeah,
originally?
I grew up on Long Island, right
Okay.
outside New York City, in a pretty densely populated suburb.
Were you pretty
Um,
athletic growing up? You playing sports and
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah. I grew up playing ice hockey. I wouldn't say I became athletic really until high school, though. Ice hockey was my only sport up until about 13, 14, in which I had grown up pretty fat and I was actually pre-diabetic or like the furthest precipice to diabetes as I could be by the time I was 13. And so I
Now, was that
played.
just genetic? I'm sorry, was that genetic or were you like eating terrible
I
or
just
like
standard American, bro.
yeah,
My parents never really had a physical practice or much
yeah,
awareness with health, so I kind of
same.
got stuck just dealing with what they knew. They didn't know any
Yeah.
better. So I kind of pioneered the way to health and fitness in my family and in
Me
my,
too.
if we think about breaking kind of like genetic curses, I'd be the
Yeah.
one to have done that. But then in high school is when I got really into I got into running first because that's what helped me lose all the weight and knocked all the diabetes out of the way. That also helped me in hockey, but then I got really obsessed with girls and wanted to get bigger and play better on ice. So that was when I got into bodybuilding and training. And then through high school, it was pretty much a battle between like high contact, very intense, aggressive ice hockey and like hardcore bodybuilding training, which just kind of led to really big headbutts in terms of what my nervous system was dealing with. And yeah, throughout high school, injuries and whatnot. But by time high school was over, I wanted to commit to bodybuilding full time. And so I signed up for my first show when I had just turned 18 and I had graduated high school, the fall before, and I was going to get into it. I'm sorry, the spring before, and I was going to get into it toward the end of that year. And like 4 weeks out, or it might have even been sooner, maybe 2 weeks out from that show, I had dieted down. I was natural at that point. Um, and I dropped a 400-pound barbell on my left leg from the top of a deadlift in a lifting accident, which
Like on your quad or what do you mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And it was, I was I'm lean as could be, emaciated. Like
Ugh.
let's go try and PR, right? It's a kind of typical teenage mindset around training, right? So I had my lifting straps on and I had 395 on the bar and it felt really good. So I like went to go slam it down and one of my straps, the way I had wrapped it, it kind of got looped under itself and it pulled one of my hands down with it. And in that pulling down, it was my right hand that got stuck. So I kind of buckled onto my left knee and it fell right into the path of the bar. It hit pretty much right where like rec fem inserts into quad
Mm.
tendon and then slid and off the tendon and like right off my kneecap. And man, that threw me for a wild ride over the years that came after that because I was so passionate about bodybuilding that it was like an ego death, like a like who I thought I was that I had developed, all throughout high school and into this pursuit of a career and what I thought would have been, my sport just kind of like crumbled right in front of me.
What were the
And
injuries specifically?
so it was partial tears off the quad tendon. It was mostly VMO and some rec fem.
Mm.
But it wasn't tendon from bone, so it was soft from hard, right? So the muscle pulled off the tendon, but I didn't actually rupture the tendon or anything, which I think saved me in a lot of ways because the way I was mistreated in terms of the diagnosis and trying to figure everything out was it was basically treated as just a bruise. For whatever reason, the ER doctor and I think I got a second opinion. They didn't want to give me an MRI because it was like a blunt impact, right? And so they were just, hey, deep muscle contusion, all the black and blues because you drop 400 pounds on your leg. So kind of just like brush me off. Good luck, rest up, ice, eat, whatever. And then 12 weeks later, I finally, like something was just so wrong. I couldn't see my kneecap for weeks. I had swelling all the way down into my foot. And obviously, like walking was just impossible. But I had to work at the time. And so I just slapped a knee brace on it and just like hobbled around and tried to make it happen.
Mm.
So 12 weeks later, obviously tissue is pretty much back there. So I finally get an MRI and they're like, hey, man, you tore this much of this off that and whatever. And the tissue's back. So kind of good luck in physical therapy because we're not going to go in and cut it open and then re-sew it together. The fibers are pretty much all back there to a degree that would make surgery more complicated than useful. And so conventional PT, chiropractics, the whole nine, just nothing was really solving it. And so again, kind of layering on the hey, I'm depleted and in the worst place for a PR. Let's go PR. It's like, man, I just fucked my body up beyond repair. Let's go buy some test off the biggest meathead at the gym and get some growth and let's see what that does,
Oh, so
right?
you went straight for the growth. That's
I
pretty
did.
rare.
So I was, I did my cycle with like bare minimum education, horrendous sourcing because the two vials I got that was supposed to last me 12 weeks lasted me 16. So it was either cut or, somehow manipulated. The
So real
growth I
quick,
never did because I was like,
oh,
I was a little frightened. And after like, getting too many shots out of a vial I shouldn't have gotten that many from, I was like, I don't know if I trust this
I'm assuming it
guy.
was like it was like Chinese. It wasn't like farm,
Ah,
like pin or anything, right? You
no,
had to constitute it
no.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
was weird, man.
So what got you into bodybuilding to begin with? Is that just the whole Long Island scene, the culture out there?
Bro, it certainly is. I think that was a big influence on it. Obviously there were a couple bigger guys than me in high school that I kind of looked up to and was like, oh yeah, like some muscle would be cool. But I signed up at a Gold's Gym when I was 15. And so I just remember walking in and like seeing Arnold and Ronnie and like the iconic photos, like the one you
Yeah.
got behind you. And it's like, man, as a 14-year-old kid, it's like, who, like, that's what I want. Why wouldn't I want my physique to be like that? It's, such a base driver of masculinity, right? Having strength and, you
And
know,
how old are you?
I'm 31 now.
Okay, so you still kind of caught the tail end of like the huge jacked cartoon characters and
Oh
stuff,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Dragon Ball Z, and I grew up mostly with like Power Rangers and stuff, which I think is why I've kind of gravitated over time toward more of the unconventional stuff. But nonetheless, yeah, bodybuilding was my first love. I was a fat kid growing up, so like, what's better than a confidence boost and having some attention from girls and having my pick of who I wanted to date and more friends and better in athletics and I felt confidence for the first time in my life from dropping the weight, and then there was a new kind of lack of confidence where it's like I'm like, oh, now I'm too skinny. I need some muscle now. And so you see these freaks, right? And it's like, damn, how could I not want to be that? And so for whatever reason, and I think a big part of it too. So like if I were to get into like my inspirations with bodybuilding, who I had found early on was Kai Green when he was still like coming up. He
Yeah.
hadn't made it to the top placings in the Olympia stage or anything yet. And I think it was mostly like his mindset and the level of discipline and all of those kinds of um underdog type mentality that he had
Yeah.
where he grew up an orphan and all this shit, and so I gravitated towards that because I didn't really have um a role model. Of course, my father was involved in my life, but I didn't have a role model for like a pursuit of mirroring something.
Yeah.
Um, my dad provided for us, did everything he could for us. I have nothing but respect and love for him. Um, but with my pursuits in athletics and stuff, like he wasn't an athlete, he wasn't a pro or anything, so I had to kind of seek elsewhere. And so I think between the aesthetics of it, the look of it, the perceived thought of like what it would feel like to have that on my body, and then really finding Kai Green and that type, and Dorian Yates, and just like the hardcore high intensity, put your fucking hoodie on and just bang, all that just was really good for me as a pretty emotionally and psychologically distraught young kid who just didn't know how to deal with anger and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty normal, you know. I think that's how a lot of us got started into it. And so you
Absolutely.
and so you started the gear while you were still recovering from an injuries, right? So you were
Yeah,
still
yeah, yeah. My thought process was like, let me get as anabolic and add tissue mode as I could,
the
and
growth
see
would
if
have
that.
helped.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, I just bought it from the biggest meathead at the gym, who I knew was a dealer, and um, I did it by myself, the dumbest way possible. But at the same time, like I was just a 19-year-old kid that, didn't have guidance and was trying to
Yeah.
figure shit out on my own. So
Were
it's
you
like,
pretty yoked too? I've seen the pictures. I've seen your whole
yeah, yeah. I mean,
transformations. You've had a lot of had a lot of lives, basically.
yeah, that's how it feels, bro. I feel like I've been, four or five different, entirely different people in my life. So the heaviest I was at the peak of that cycle, which I'm 5'7", and I was fluffy, but I almost got to 200 pounds. I clocked in at 198 pounds. And I think I was benching, like 130, 140 pound dumbbells for
Yeah,
reps. And I was back to squatting and deadlifting pretty heavy, although it was developing some severe compensations because obviously I'm squatting around this
yeah,
injury and the pattern just wasn't what it was. But as I imagine you've ran some gear in your life, right? Um, High levels of test essentially make you feel invincible to a degree. And so, the tissue growth and the strength and everything I developed, as much as I felt that way temporarily, when it came time to come off, because I wasn't sure like how this was going to continue. And given the context that like what I had gotten, I kind of figured out was not as clean as it should have been.
yeah.
I think I had gotten like what is it, a Arimidex or Clomid or something as a PCT,
You
and I think that's what it was.
usually it'd be like a
And
Nova and the Clomid if you're doing the
Oh, no,
PCT.
Novadex,
Yeah.
Novadex, Novadex. That's what it was. Yep. And that was also bunk.
Oh
So
shit.
I essentially cold turkeyed, and my cycle was I think it was like 14 or 15 weeks. It was supposed to be 12, and I might even left some in the vial at this point. The years after that threw me for such a whirlwind that it's kind of fuzzy. But and then I went from this like right massive injury, stacked compensation, and a super physiological sense of self on top of that injury, and then just crumbled it to the ground afterwards. And so for 18 months or so, as a 19 and a half to 21-year-old kid who's like supposed to be peaking, in testosterone and energy, and I was just in the dumps, bro. And so that was an emotional roller coaster for me that took me away from training slowly. Like I kept working out, but it wasn't training, right? It wasn't toward
Yeah.
a goal, it wasn't toward a purpose, it wasn't very intense.
What
And
were you feeling mentally? So I mean, everything's in the tanks, right? So you must be
yeah,
feeling.
yeah, yeah. I was an emotional roller coaster. I had just like at that right before I started the cycle, I had ended a very toxic long-term high school relationship. And so I just kind of went bouncing between relationships. I got into partying more. I started smoking a ton of pot. That eventually led to a lot more drug use in my early 20s.
This is the hippie phase.
Not yet. That was more my party phase. The party
Okay.
phase turned hippie, right? So I was doing a lot of like ecstasy
So
and
like
all
the
that
party
stuff.
drugs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, more stimulant based
Yeah.
psychoactive drugs, right? Going to raves. And then that kind of gave me an insight to this new world, basically, of what I had no idea was possible psychologically, right? Because those peak states, they diminish a lot of real world experiences, but then they also kind of tap you into this like potentiality. And so I really clung on to that in an unhealthy way. So I started pursuing DJing. I went to school in New York City to be a music producer and started making house music and techno and trying to get gigs
I
and
had
all
no
this other
idea. That's
stuff.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. And so that eventually led me to another kind of brick wall where it's like, man, what happened was I had gotten some of my stuff tested at a festival and it turned out to be like pure
This was
methamphetamine.
ecstasy tested, like
Yeah,
Molly.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah. It turned out to be pure
that's
methamphetamine,
that's really good. They do that. That's awesome.
well, it was the people who were camping next to us. Actually, they kind of
Mm.
said this guy. I mean, I still think they're partying, but I mean, he totally shifted the trajectory of my life in that one night because what I had realized was all, and this kind of overlays with the testosterone stuff that I had picked up from the guy at the gym, where it's like I thought I was doing something and it was something else.
Yeah.
And then I went into the party phase and I thought I was doing something. And the person who I bought from, 20, 30, 40 times. And now it's like, oh, whoa, I really wasn't doing what I thought I was doing. So let me like clean my shit up here now, right? So this is like age 23. So I had like, from 19 and a half, that's trickled into the partying into 20s. And then from 20 to about 23, I really just went hardcore. Um, and then I just kind of like backed off the partying, then turned to more like the hippie drugs, right? The safer, psychedelic type substances. So um, that also got me a little bit more in tune with my level of health. And then that really sparked my journey to finding a balance between health and something physical. And then now, years after that kind of point, I decided to go to where I'm at now over the last 5 years. So, or I guess close to six now. So 25 to 31. I've kind of been on the same path over the last 6 years. Where before that, it was just like these constant left and right turns, right? So after I got into the psychedelics, I found this water store on Long Island and I started working there. It was the first time I had ever really drank clean water in my life, right? Plastic water is never going to hydrate you. It's just purified tap water that sits in plastic and it's acidic, and you're getting all these microplastics and all this garbage in it. So I started really prioritizing water, and I noticed like this sense of clarity within myself and my consciousness, and just slept better, sweat more, digested better, all these things.
Is there like a
And
specific kind of water you're talking about? Like you're doing like
it
alkalized or
it
like
was
the
an
pH?
alkaline water store, yes, and they were using those electrolysis machines, which
Okay.
I
That's
don't
what we have in my
stand.
gym. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't stand by those anymore. I just prefer really high quality, but not electrocuted water, because that's what the
Yeah.
electrolysis does. And so, depending on how good the filtration is with that electrolysis process, it can actually make things active in the water that you wouldn't want
Okay.
active, right? If there's residue from the tap or
Okay. That's good to
pre-filtration
know.
type stuff. And what I also found was I started pairing that with veganism, right? Because I was attracted to a girl that I was working with at that store, and just started doing some yoga, and I'm like, okay, if I'm doing some yoga, I might as well go vegan, right? So
Just
this is kind of,
180 from the Long Island
I
juice head
know, bro. I
bodybuilder.
know, bro. It's really hilarious. It's comical for me to look back at it. But it gave me like this dichotomy of perspective now, right?
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, so and then also, right, like stacking dysfunction on dysfunction, right? So cold turkey test, do a bunch of serotogenic drugs that tank your test, and then go vegan and take your
Yeah.
test even further. Um, so yeah, that got me into moving and eating better again. And then I'll pause there because I just went on a quite the tangent there. But yeah, so that's
Did
like age 24 or 25. I'm getting, vegan and yoga.
did you get into any like the DMT, ayahuasca or anything like that?
No, no. The hardest things I had done were a lot of mushrooms and some LSD, but
Yeah.
mostly the mushrooms is what I was getting into at the time.
I never had done mushrooms ever till like this last year, and like my system's so weird. Like they don't really do a lot for me at
Oh,
all. Like, and
interesting.
yeah, my system's really weird. I clear stuff really fast. But yeah, I was
Oh,
curious about
wow.
the DMT, the ayahuasca, because that would probably be the one thing I would definitely be open to try. A lot of I train a lot of like CEOs and big time clients, and
Sure, sure.
that they think it's helpful to reset it once a year every now and then, just give you some perspective. You have the right watchful eye over you. Is that something you would all consider now, or now you're in a headspace where that's not even
No,
anything?
no, no. Based on my current beliefs and lifestyle and everything that I've done over the past years, kind of growing away from that kind of mindset, I had done more than enough of it, in my opinion, to ever get any answer. And for me, something that I always talk about from those experiences with people who maybe like yourself are considering things, or maybe tried it but didn't get what you thought you were going to get. In my experience, I only ever got more questions. And to the degree that I got questions, I got maybe a few answers. And what I've understood about it personally, and from what I've seen kind of cyclically with a lot of people, is it kind of creates this snake eating its tail and never fully digests itself, where you go into it with the best intentions, maybe, or a buddy of yours said, hey, this XYZ happened for me, and blah blah blah. And you just leave it, typically almost always needing another one, and then another one, or maybe a different substance, and then you know what I'm saying. So I had done that enough to kind of realize, like, the duration that I had been doing it, I had gotten what I had gotten from it, like, far before I actually
Yeah.
stopped using those things. And for me, as a father and as a business owner, and I'm now an Orthodox Christian, so Eastern Christianity, the original church. And right, a more sober lifestyle suits me best. I just feel like I'm more dialed. I feel more me,
Yeah.
as like an individual that can't have my boundaries pushed into, where those substances, they're designed to dissolve boundary.
Yeah.
And so I had dissolved it, and I fragmented myself far enough, and I had to fucking reach and
Was
stretch
it
for all
like
those
mentally
pieces.
hard? I mean, you didn't have like any physical like withdrawals or anything, right? But like,
No, no, no,
was it
no.
like
It's
mentally a
it's
hard change, or you were like, is it like when your son was born, that was it, or it took some time
Um,
to get there
it
mentally?
it took a little bit of time. By the time my son had been born, I maybe took like a couple microdoses of psilocybin, and I was still smoking weed regularly, though. And weed, in my opinion, is way more psychoactive than a lot of people will admit that it is, especially with like the crazy strains that are out there
Yeah.
now. It's just like so not what it ever used to be. Where it's almost become like GMO foods, right? Where it's like a seedless fruit, but they still somehow keep producing it, right? And it's just becoming too much. So I had completely sobered up from any psychoactive substance. By time my son had turned one, in like a couple months, I'd say. Because what started happening as a father is, like, I'd go out and smoke a little bowl and do some movement or whatever, and I'd come in and I'd look at my son and I'd be like, just kind of like dumbfounded, where it's like, man, I created this thing, and I'm in this state where I'm like having anxiety about everything. And so I'm like, this can't be a good thing to keep on going. And so I just finally found something that was powerful enough for me to commit to, and haven't looked back since. I've been around weed all the time. I got friends that do psychedelics and whatnot, and I'm just, if God made it, there's a purpose to it. But I have used many things,
Yeah.
and there's really not much that I need now. And I do get that inkling, right? Like, hey man, have a toke, do this, and then it's such a fleeting thought at this point where it's laughable to me. And It wasn't always that. I tried quitting, 20 times, 30 times because I smoked for like 8, 9 years and it just didn't happen. And then it finally did. And now it's, I've only seen an increase in all the things I was hoping for and getting rid of it.
Nice. I think a lot of people will, like I mean, I smoke a lot of weed. I'll go through periods where I just got to get away and just,
Yeah.
like you said, you're in a different state. Like at a certain point, it's just like I don't know what my normal is, and so I got to take
Yeah,
a few days
sure.
off. And that's always so like you kind of like feel like okay, it's gonna open up this other side of you when it's like I really do just as good as stuff whenever I'm not. I look at it. In fact, a lot of times it makes more sense when I'm reading what I'm like wrote. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
and then during this whole time when your test levels are like fluctuating a lot, were you getting blood work done? Did you have some blood work in this time period?
No, man, and I really wish I did because I make a post every once in a while of the past transformations and stuff, but I am so lucky that I was somehow able to bounce back. And I think a part of it was that I had only done it once
Yeah.
and I was young enough where I might not be where I should be potentially, but it wasn't, sustained enough or dumb enough for long enough where like it really wrecked me. But I stacked a bunch of bad choices on bad choices and had to really just learn the hard way with it.
How
And
did you feel with the veganism? Did you feel like that
oh
contributed to
man,
it?
bro. Oh my goodness. I just posted a photo the other day and it was a video of me when I first started like picking up a kettlebell in 2018 when I started yeah, it was 2018 late 2018 when I started working out again. And my neck like it's like a chicken neck.
They're pretty
Like
funny pictures.
like a freaking, an 8-year-old girl could break my neck at that point if she wanted to. And I didn't realize it back then, just like how much of me I had lost, and not only like tissue wise, or like but I was just so effeminate and emotionally weak and just swayed by my feelings, and I couldn't be disciplined, and it was so hard for me to put like intense work into. And that was really the thing for me was like having my son, my first son, which is going to be a version of me as close as I could see it because he's a boy, right? I'm like, man, what kind of example am I to this child in 5 years if I don't really like get my shit together here? Get
Yeah.
sober, get strong, be who I want to be. And so that was really the big thing. And that took some time. Like I had that realization. I have a photo of myself in the bathroom mirror the day after he was born, just like miserable. Like you
Oh,
can see it in
I
my
think I have a post.
face.
You have a post of that, right? I think
Yeah, just like
I'll overlay that. Yeah.
lifeless and soft and skinny fat and just like miserable, clearly miserable. And not that, anything relationally or anything about the birth of my son was miserable or anything like that, but just like about myself, who I
Yeah.
was. I just had no vitality anymore, it seemed like no vibrance, no zeal for life or energy for life. And yeah, man. Once I got back into strength training, it just was slow. And this I got back into strength training also about 6 months after no longer being vegan. So I was vegan for about 2 whole years. And not being vegan was actually driven by my fiance Selena being pregnant, where she was vegan for 6 years. She had done hardcore, like no oil, no salt, juice fasting, just eating like salads and bananas, basically, like she was deep into it as well.
Yeah.
And so I think it was about 10 weeks into the pregnancy, her body was just screaming for eggs and meat. And she had
Well, I'm
like
sure
a
the
whole
doctors probably told her too, right? Were the doctors trying to tell her to be
so
better
we're
to?
we're pretty crunchy people, bro. We had home births. I was the
Yeah.
one
Oh
who
wow.
caught my
The
boy. It was my
wow. The
mom.
first one. That's scary. That's
Both of them.
awesome.
Yeah, it was just my
Yeah.
mom and her mom and me. So we're not the people to really trust the medical system and
Yeah.
establishment, in many ways and for many reasons and for good reasons
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, once she got pregnant, she's like, I got this. I don't need a midwife. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
like I'm just your pillar here. So I'm running with whatever's going to make you most comfortable. Um, so no, it was more just an intuitive thing for her. Like she's
Yeah.
just like, I need meat
Yeah.
and I'm done being a vegan. And so that internal feeling drove her to an external research mode of, looking at the other side of vegan propaganda, right? Because we were propagandized to believe it. So there's got to be some information on the other side. And within like a day or two, we're at her mom's house and she's just slamming eggs. And I'm like, oh man, that looks good. Like, my mouth is watering. And I remember the first time I had eggs, bro, it was like I felt this sense of vitality in my body that I felt warm and like invigorated and alive for the first time in 2 years. And within a couple months, we were eating meat and steaks and eggs and bacon and milk
What did you
and
notice
butter.
changed in your like mood or
I
body or
felt like a fucking man again.
yeah.
I mean, bro, I personally believe everyone, and nutrition's it's a hard
Yeah.
topic,
Yeah,
and
people will get mad at you for saying your experience, you know?
yeah, I don't fuck them, whatever. I don't
Yeah,
care if you get mad at me.
exactly.
Doesn't take away from it being the
Yeah.
thing that happened to me. Um, yeah, man, I I didn't realize like how effeminate I was until I started eating in a way that was productive for my endocrine system, which was unfortunately at like a pretty hard, deficit from all my other choices, which I can only take accountability for, right? So it just it was the best way I could put it is like there was a sense of warmth in my body that I didn't have, which is likely like a metabolic axis, right? Like my thyroid was like, let's get warm again, right? Instead of having cold hands and cold feet and no energy all the time, kind of thing. I felt like my balls swelled up, and I'm like, okay, like I sleeping better, waking up like I was, 17 again, and it just like was like, oh, this is what a 25-year-old body should feel like. And obviously having a kid on the way and then having him born, like that was just a freight truck of responsibilities and paradigm shifts and internal perspective shifts that couldn't have came at a better time, because had I kept going down those paths, into my later 20s and now into my 30s, I would probably be like a pretty big wreck, big wreck. So I'm glad I kind of got a lot of hard shit out of the way early, and now I can just do my best to make the most out of it.
Yeah, so at the prime. Where did you meet your wife?
I met her in Sedona, Arizona, while I was on a vacation, and it was not to take too much of the story up, but it was just love at first sight. As many red flags from the outside looking in as there could have been, and it was something that has from the beginning felt like there was a divine intervention, and throughout our entire relationship has been vindication of that original belief about us meeting, and everything that's happened and how we've grown together and
Seems like you
built
changed a
a
lot
whole.
together. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were both free spirit hippies. She was living in her van. I didn't have money, and I went to the restaurant she worked at on my credit card.
That's awesome.
And yeah, now we got, two successful businesses. We're living on a homestead. We got our own cows, chickens, two
That's
kids,
awesome. I'm
you know.
curious about this, the home birth. Are
Yeah.
you in bed or are you in the bath? I know some people do like in the bathtub, right? How do you guys do
Yeah,
this?
yeah. I mean, it's hard to really say where it's going to happen. Um and it just kind of went the way that it went. Like the first one, she was she was in a squat on the bed though, which is like a hard position to maintain, but that's just like
Yeah.
where she was pushing and where Kai decided to come out.
And who's
uh,
with you? Do you have like a doula or like a midwife or somebody there that can like
the
help reposition if something were to happen?
Yeah, so the first one, it was just me, her, my mom, and her mom, with really no plan B other than knowing for a fact we had a hospital within 15 minutes of a
Yeah,
drive. So,
yeah.
like,
There we go.
we're never against the actual use of the Western medicine or the best fit use of Western medicine, which is like acute, immediate, I need
Yeah,
help now. Right. So that's
exactly.
kind of like, I'm not going to say it's useless entirely, but I'm going to use it for
The
the
drugs
purpose.
more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, anything chronic or long term, like that's a total just shit show in terms of them actually
Yeah.
helping solve anything, right? But if you're bleeding out, like, hey man, an
Yeah.
ambulance is going to have stitches and coagulants and everything you need. So like, there's value in it, right? So, and as a man, which you have a kid, right? I think I
Yeah, I've
saw
got
in your
two.
stories.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome, brother, awesome. Congrats.
Yeah.
Um, as a man, really our primary job through the pregnancy is just as like a support system. And whatever's going to make her feel less stressed throughout the process is going to be our best piece to stick to. And we could try and, steer things and funnel things and give perspective. But at the end of the day, that baby's coming out of her. It's not coming out of me. And so if there's something that's going to be off in any environment, whether that's in the hospital or in a birth center or in a bathtub, or some women go into the fucking ocean with
Yeah.
dolphins nearby, like whatever that is for her, like that's my thing that I need to anchor into and make as comfortable and safe as possible. So I had my fears about it. Who the fuck wouldn't,
Your
But
family was all good. They none of them had any concerns.
I mean, yes and no. Yes, but they weren't voiced to a degree or impactful on us enough to a degree that would have shifted her kind of influence in her own
Yeah.
intuition of what she really wanted from it. And so it was, yeah, just trial by fire, man. The second one, we did have our friend who was a midwife on call, in which she arrived at our house like 5 minutes after our second son was born. And that was helpful. And now,
Yeah.
Selena's also kind of gotten a little more conservative about it. We're thinking about another one. And, maybe the third time she's going to want a full time, doula or midwife or who knows. So yeah, it was really just like we were young, we're 25, we don't trust the system, and we're just gonna fucking wing it and pray to God that it all works out because this is how it was done for,
Yeah.
thousands of years. So and that's kind of also like a maybe a bit of a presuppositional kind of thread of just like this inherent idea of the perfect intelligence that runs our imperfect body, right? Like
Yeah.
just trust in that kind of autonomous sense where it's like, hey man, your heart beats for a reason and we could rely on that, right? Like your body was designed to give birth, and so if we give it the right inputs and you feel like this is the right thing, well then let's trust that kind of natural process, and see where that goes.
Yeah, it's just crazy because both of my kids were born under like not the best circumstances. So I can't imagine
Oh
that.
man.
My son was a month early,
Oh wow, wow.
and then my daughter, my girl was in labor for like 24 hours. She didn't dilate
Oh
enough,
my
so they had to do a
goodness, yeah.
C-section. So not
Yeah,
an option
yeah.
for me. But that's always interesting. I've heard, I'm in like I was in the Hollywood area for quite a while, and that was kind of
Oh,
like
okay.
a thing out there. A lot of people were doing that.
Yeah, sure.
And so you got back into working out, you started going like right away to the unconventional stuff, or did you get back into the bodybuilding style? You said you
Yeah,
picked up a kettlebell right away, right?
yeah, to a degree. I mean, unconventional is such a broad term, and it's one that I like, and I think it's pretty easy to put a finger on. But what I was seeking was basically a strength training philosophy and potentially a system, if the system wound up falling into place right, that definitely just wasn't what I had done in the past. Um, because with bodybuilding training, there's so much value to hypertrophy. There's so much value to treating bodybuilding as a sport, and if that is the sport you want to pursue, then the training has to match. Like I'm not against bodybuilding training. I all I think is that it's going to adapt your nervous system in a particular way that may or may not be in alignment with other areas of someone's life if they're not going to make it their sport, right? And so for me, I'm like, okay, I know I need to put some size on. I know I want to get training with weights again, but I know for a fact that based on my injuries and the compensations and all this other stuff, like I can't be just braced in bilateral anymore because I never felt like what I thought I should feel like when I was strong. Like I felt strong, but then also somewhat limited to a degree. Where it was like, sure, I could bench X or deadlift Y or squat Z, but like if I went to go sprint or I got on the ice again, it's like, is my back gonna hurt or am I gonna, feel stiff or am I gonna be worried about something? And so that eventually led me to calisthenics, and hand balancing. So I looked at a lot of like the acrobatics guys and the more of like the yoga based strength training kind of guys, right? Where they're jacked and flexible, but they're not,
Did you ever get like the animal flow stuff at all?
a tiny bit there on that one. So the calisthenics turned into mostly just handstands, which then turned into some Olympic ring stuff. which then turned into going to the gym again, which was like kettlebells, steel mace I got into for a little bit, and then I found functional patterns, and I bit down on functional patterns for a few months. But what was apparent to me about functional patterns was just looking at the system as a whole, it was too black and white where barbells are bad and only what FP does is good. And I don't like that. And then on top of it, like, yeah, they can move really well. And maybe those are some attributes that would benefit me, but they don't look strong. Like what they do is impressive at a qualitative degree, like the precision of it. But at a quantitative degree, it's like, I need
Mhm.
tension, I need to like grit
Okay.
my teeth and lift some heavy shit. And so that was
What
when I
what
found,
is I'm sorry, what is functional
yeah,
patterns whole thing about the spine? I followed Naughty like 15 years ago, and I've never really followed with him. I
yeah,
mean, I know
yeah.
he's what is his opinion of the spine and functional patterns?
So he bases, from what I understand, almost all of his movements and ideas on Tom Myers' anatomy trains, fascial lines work. Have you ever read that
Oh,
book or looked
no,
into
but
it?
I do like fascial lines and the
Yeah,
biotensegrity and all
yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah, so that's all Tom Myers pioneering really in the industry as like kind of the spearhead of making this stuff more mainstream. And so, he bases everything on bipedal locomotion, Nowdy. Now, with bipedal locomotion being the foundation, if we load the spine axially to any degree, they're talking about compressive forces that are creating adhesions and dehydrated tissues and co- uh, compensations that could also be perceived as adaptations to a stimulus that they don't believe within their niche is useful to the optimum function of a human body. Now, his definition of a human body is very mechanistic, and the way he sells his programming in a lot of ways is very much so you're bad, you're wrong, you're broken, I have
Yeah.
solution. So I don't like the marketing tactics of it at all. And then in terms of like the user experience, what I have found is similar to like the psychedelics, where it's this constant feedback loop of like never ending. If the primary thought process is my body is dysfunctional and I need to seek and chase and edge out dysfunction over time, the focus is on a different target. And so, psychologically and emotionally and spiritually, in my opinion, that's going to create this kind of cultish like identity within the system that's going to constantly be driving someone toward less and less harmony because all they're focusing on at such a lasered in level is how wrong something is. And for me, I feel like that kind of takes the soul out of a person, right? So, it's almost like if you have perfect biomechanics, they believe you're going to be a perfect human being. And I mean, come on. Like, is that all you value? Like, is that really all that you value? And so basically, anything that does not require some kind of contralateral reciprocation or some tensioning of these anatomy trains based fascial lines and whatever else he gets into. I don't know. I don't follow him. I don't give a shit at all about what he does. He helps people, which is awesome, and I love it. It's not for me though, and it never will be.
There's no
Um,
strongman training that style.
I mean, it's
I
arguable.
mean,
They got
like the
some
people
pro
training
at.
strongman.
Well, no,
They
no. I mean,
would.
those guys, man. And I
Well,
could
part of
kind
the
of,
biomechanics are what works for what you're doing, right? And you can always
yes,
decompress outside of what you're doing too. It's like you're gonna get compression working out. Like you don't have to
yes.
necessarily be afraid of that. You just don't want to be stuck there, you know?
And they kind of they bias decompression to a degree that a strongman would bias compression. So it's like there's no middle here.
Yeah.
Like you're just the complete and like you look at their guys and they're like so elevated and protracted and they look like a robot and it's like cool, but no thank you. And my kind of thing about my framework on why I love axial loading, and I think it's amazing getting under a back squat, picking up a stone or a deadlift or whatever it might be. It's a pressure management task, in my opinion, where it's like the adaptations that I'm getting from having 2.5 times my body weight on my back. It's like there's so much pressure that I have to manage through that range, and that management of pressure is going to get me down, and I'm going to have all that filled up, and then I'm going to exhale and go pop up out of the bottom of a squat or whatever. And there's a positive benefit to being able to handle that much pressure. Just like there's a negative benefit to not being able to handle that much pressure, or any pressure at all, because all you do is, this. Um, so yeah, it's like, any compressive force on the spine is a net guaranteed negative, is their belief, basically. And it just seems so stupid to me to
Yeah.
throw away, something that is valuable within context, like you mentioned, where the definition of function has to be contextual.
Oh, yeah.
And if we only contextualize it to their perceived belief about human evolution and how we became bipedal locomotive animals, in which I don't believe in evolution, so like that gives me an ability to just throw that thought process out the window anyway. Um, like, that's the only context that training is going to get you better at. And then anything related to those mechanics, sure, qualitatively you might get better, but there's got to be a line that is based on someone's goals as well, where and that line for me gets drawn where it's like, if you make me feel bad about my body, like, I don't want a fucking thing to do with you. I don't care if you're a PhD stacked to the fucking ceiling. I don't care who you are, what you believe in. Like, if you're going to make me feel like something is wrong about, like, just because my body strategizes a particular movement pattern, because, I played hockey and I shot one way my whole life, or I have to sit at a desk to feed my family and do my job. And, my tech neck is, all of a sudden like the worst thing in the world, man. It pisses me off. It pisses me off. Anyway,
What
digress.
what do you do full time? Are you coaching full time? Or are you?
Yeah, yeah. So I coach
Yeah.
full time.
Yeah.
I have my goal right now is to basically create as many online programs as I can, and then still take my virtual clients, because I live rurally. So, as an example, like the local personal trainer is charging $20 an hour for a session.
Where you live again?
I live in North Carolina, central and North
Wow,
Carolina. So kind of far from anything very populated, but we
pretty
got some
cool
stuff in
though.
areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's trade-offs with the rural lifestyle, and community is definitely one of them, because if you are going to find it, it's going to take longer to get to, because you just don't see people as often,
Yeah.
or you got to drive far to go hang out with people and whatnot. Um, so yeah, I have my virtual coaching, and that's like real time one-on-one sessions, similar to this on Zoom or FaceTime or
You're on Zoom
whatnot.
while they work out. Like
Yeah,
on face.
yeah, and I always make sure if it's in a quiet environment, like cool, no headphones, but like if we're in a gym, I need you to have Bluetooth, so like I'm as in person as I possibly can. And over the past almost 2 years now living here and developing that kind of coaching style, I've definitely found some really great ways to make results and to make gains with these clients, who some of them are, I got a client in Norway, I got a client in the UK, I got someone, California. And it's really cool to be able to have that access to people and still make something happen as if it's like I'm there in person. But the unfortunate trade-off for me in this profession is like, the hands-on work is always the best, and for me the most rewarding. And so I found ways to make that as close as I possibly can to not having it.
When did you first get into the Weck stuff? How did you come about that?
So that was after the FP thing. um so like I did the 10-week FP course. Oh, I lost that light. It's very
Yeah, you're real
dark if
dark.
I
No
yeah,
can
it's
see your pretty
very
face.
it's very dark if I don't have this light on here.
It was already a little dark, I was gonna tell you, but now you're like the shadow.
Yeah, it's the problem of this gigantically bright window behind me.
Yeah, no
We'll
worries. I
see
was
if we
good.
can get that turned on.
No
Um,
worries.
so I found rope flow first.
Ah, who you saw David
And
doing it, or who'd you see
no,
doing it?
I saw Tim Sheaf doing it,
I don't know
because
him.
yeah, so Tim Sheaf, his handle is Way of the Rope. That's
Okay,
his primary handle on
okay,
Instagram.
check him
And
out.
he's got a course and sells ropes. He's got other programs and stuff like that as well. But I started following Tim because he publicly denounced his veganism, in which he had like
Mhm.
a massive vegan following.
Oh wow.
And so I heard him on like a Paul Check podcast.
Oh, I love Paul Check.
And yeah, and I was like, man, this guy seems legit. Like he's honest, he's truthful. He's a badass athlete because he was doing all this crazy parkour stuff his whole life. So let me just give him a follow and, just kind of follow his journey from the vegan, standpoint. And so I'm like, so I'm following him, and out of nowhere, I just see him swinging this rope around his body and doing this weird stuff. And David was at a pretty intense part of his life where he was calling himself Uncle Weck, and he had the blonde hair, and he was all charismatic as could be, and just saying the weirdest shit on Instagram that like doesn't
Mad
make
scientist.
sense,
Yeah.
yeah, like mad scientist, genius, crazy guy on Instagram. And but I know Tim is a good mover. I would trust what he's finding value in terms of movement. And he's not a jack dude, but he's strong as shit when it comes to like what he could do with his body. And so I'm like, let me try this rope float thing. Like it looks cool. Like maybe if I get good at it, light's trying to come on. I could look badass and I could move kind of like a ninja and I could, have this kind of there we go. I could have this kind of prowess about me that I kind of lost over time with the athletics and then the bodybuilding and then the partying and then being a yogi. I did hatha and kundalini yoga, very strict
Yeah.
practices of yoga, and you become very flaccid. Like your tendons just get locked long. Your soft tissue doesn't generate tension or deal with tension very well anymore.
You're like absorbing force instead of producing it, a lot of the
You're just sinking into gravity, basically.
yeah.
Like your body's in this weird slack that you just can't really get out of because it's not very biomechanically
And some people think
advantageous.
that's great to have that amount of slack and flexibility. I always
Ah,
tell them like you want a certain amount of tension for sure.
yeah, I mean, you look at a guy like Juji Mufu, and it's like, if I want flexibility, I want that kind of
Yeah.
flexibility where it's 260 pounds. He could
You've been
squat a
seeing him doing
house
the
and
rope lately. It's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Juji actually bought my course, which I'm honored. He
Oh, that's
he
cool.
yeah, we've been talking a tiny bit on Instagram, and I
Yeah.
love seeing big guys swing the rope because it's
Yeah.
so fucking good for you, which we can get
Oh, it's
into.
so good. Yeah, your
Um,
course. I bought your course. That's how I got started with it. I didn't know if you
oh,
know
that's
that.
awesome, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, how did you
Cool.
even find me then?
I
You
was
remember?
into the Weck stuff and I was into
Oh,
the
okay,
rope.
okay.
I had seen I had seen a lot of people like that look awesome, like Flow with AJ, awesome.
Yeah, yeah,
Winding ropes, who Alpaca Flow,
yeah,
they're
yeah.
they're badass. But it's like then I saw you and even Chris is great, but and then I saw
Chris
you,
is a monster, dude.
but your style just really drew me a little more. It was like more like attacking and aggressive almost, and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I just
yeah,
kind of identify. Like this is like I said, the other one, like oh, it's kind of awesome. They're
yeah.
fucking so skilled, but I didn't really connect with it. And then I saw you're like attacking as you're going. I was like, okay, I'll give this a go. So yeah,
Oh
your
man,
course
that's
helped
so
me a lot.
awesome. Oh,
Oh
that's
yeah, for
so
sure.
fucking awesome. I'm honored. I'm honored that you saw that as the type of person that you are. Because for me, one of my main goals over the past years that I've really been developing my practice and who I am as a coach and my skill set and what I like doing and everything is like, if I were to look right at me when I first found the rope and like put that in front of me when I was a 19-year-old juice head, be like, fuck you,
Right.
bro. Like, what is that gonna do for me? Right. And so I totally understand like why it's not an enticing practice for lack of a better word, in the conventional fitness realm just yet, right? But for someone like yourself, where you're like a fucking muscle bound dude, like the benefits of that kind of
Oh yeah.
fluidity and rotation, it's like you keep all your size, you keep your mass, you keep the beauty of the aesthetic that you fucking carved out over 10, 20 years. But like you can start moving differently now, right?
Oh yeah.
You're not so blocky and you feel stuck like that. Um, so yeah, anyway, found the rope through Tim. And then I saw David, and I love fringe people. If you're a weirdo, like let's have a weird conversation, right? Let's figure out who we really are, kind of thing, right? And so I saw David, and I'm like, man, half of what he says I can understand, what I see him doing makes perfect sense. And let me just like give this a try. So I tried the rope out, a very kind of uh I'm like, okay, I see like there's some cool stuff here, but like, is it really what they're saying it is? Like this kind of ultimatum type, you will never move the same way after you get it down kind of thing. So I bought it. I took it to me to the gym one day, which I was starting to train regularly. I was training more unconventional, but like with conventional kind of movements, right? So I'd put some different flair on a bench press, or I'd use a machine a little bit differently or whatever. And it was a pull day. So I do a set of pull ups, which I always warmed up with. And in the past, my set of pull ups, my first set was always the best set of the, 3, 4 I was doing. So I take the rope out of the box after that first set. I watch the video on YouTube and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do this race and chase for a minute in between each set. I'm like, okay, boom. Okay, I got this. I could see how my core is working. I could see how my hands are moving. And I'm getting some fluidity and whatever. I go do another set of pull ups and I get 4 or 5 more reps. But the thing that really flipped me out was that the perceived rate of exertion was very lower, much lower than the first set. But I actually was able to connect to my injured, 100 times dislocated left side of my body in a way that I was like, screaming to heaven, like, please, can I just feel my left lat? Like, can I just get my shoulder overhead without this fear of dislocation? Can I, after crushing my leg, like, can I put pressure on my heel to actually squat in a straight line? Can I push off my big toe in a way that I could actually project myself into a sprint? And after that, I'm just like, oh my God, 60 seconds. And what it wound up being was more than the patterning work, it's the brain input that the
Yeah.
hands give to your sensory and motor cortexes, which for me, and for whatever reason, was a very low hanging fruit for my proprioceptive deficits. Where it was like, for whatever reason, whether it was the drugs, the injuries, any combination physiologically in my brain, the midline crossing movement patterns that the rope gave me just lit me up like a Christmas tree and was the exact like panacea type foundation of proprioceptive input that allowed me to get way more neuromuscular output that I had been seeking, for so many years in different ways of training and thoughts and stuff like that. So after that minute, I was absolutely hooked. The schmock downs the mock downs happened after that. And no gyms were open, so I just, at that time, I was smoking some weed. I just wake up at sunrise, rip the bowl, and just for hours just fucking roll this rope, because it just felt
Yeah.
like this is exactly what my body needed. And then it was that summer that I kicked weed, started training more, especially after I got out of weed, because weed was keeping me very lazy. And that was where I started really understanding how the rope informs the tensioning and the use of the spine that can be exploited in strength training, that can take any movement, any tool, any modality, and give it some type of a biomechanical flavor that's going to impact locomotion, swinging, throwing, catching, and carrying, right? Because those are kind of the 5 things. We have gait, walking, jogging, running, sprinting, catching, carrying, swinging, throwing. Those are kind of like the fundamental criteria that I kind of place biomechanics into. And so, with all that understanding, plus now, like, oh, I get to do what I love, which is lift heavy shit. And obviously, heavy is contextual for us over the journey, and intensity is a scale that actually scales up over time, right? With what we could deal with. Like, I could get that input, but then walk out feeling like a cheetah who's ready to go run and, go play with my kid, or go do whatever I needed to do. And so from that point, like, sold as sold could be on the value that I got from just one use. And I just deep dove into it without any reservation.
So if you had to list like a couple of the main specific benefits you think the rope provides, and you kind of already did, but what would you say are the main primary
Yeah.
benefits that even maybe geared towards like a bodybuilder,
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
who would
Yeah.
probably benefit from everyone would benefit from it, but especially a bodybuilder? How might you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I'm talking to someone in the bodybuilding crowd, the way that I like to kind of categorize that type of person is someone who is muscle bound, where you have a lot of muscle tissue. And that density and that recruitment and all of that in terms of the binding is typically kind of like stuck in patterns that you train because that's just what happens. Our body is going to adapt to the stimulus that we are experiencing under stress. And training is a massive stressor. And that's what makes it such a positive impact on our life, right? And so the way that I look at it is you have all this tissue, which is fucking amazing. And like the dedication and everything it takes to get that is phenomenal, but the nervous system point of all that tissue is limited to those very linear and typically pretty isolated type movement patterns, which if we're talking athletics and we're talking, fluid dynamic force transmission and being able to really like accelerate and take things and, maintain that kind of efficiency, it's just not going to be there in that nervous system. And so for that type of person, the rope is the perfect low barrier for entry, low impact, super simple way to get not only the movement patterns of that type of neural drive, but also the stimulation of the brain that's going to help you use all that mass and all that strength in ways that aren't bound by the typical patterns you train yourself in. And so for me, like when I get very big and when I develop a lot of tissue on me in the past, I almost felt like I felt kind of restricted by that tissue. Like I almost feel like I had like a bodysuit of armor on that I couldn't really like get through sometimes. And so what the rope typically provides is that sense of like expanding that suit of armor of muscle that you've built, but like giving it some more options to situate itself and to organize itself and to utilize itself, that's going to take you and actually make you better at your sport if it's bodybuilding, because you're going to have more, sensory motor cortex action going on. You're going to have more rotational capacity, and rotational movements going to fire your, midsection in a very different way, and it could produce potentially a very different aesthetic that might be awesome, right? In my opinion, this type of movement is seen a little bit more in the like classic aesthetics of like the kind of Arnold's era, where it's like this two-dimensional kind of, front to back and then super wide and very flowy type look of the physique, right? I mean, those guys were running for
Yeah.
cardio. They were sprinting, some of them, and they were doing all sorts of, non-rigid movements that developed the physiques that they developed. And
I always talk
over
about in that and pumping iron where they're playing and throwing the football and catching on the field. It's like
yeah,
you don't see the
yeah.
top six guys in
Yeah.
Olympia doing that nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. And if they are, it's because they played a sport for long enough that their nervous system can remember that with all the mass they put on top of it, and became a greatest of all time in the sport, right? Like I think it was like Sebum could still dunk a basketball or something.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, well, he played college basketball, right? So it's like his body, for the way
Oh,
his,
Phil Heath. You think about Phil Heath, maybe?
maybe it was Phil. I forget who it
Yeah,
was.
I think it was Phil. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it was Phil. You're right. And Phil was like
yeah. He's
gigantor on
shorter
stage.
too.
So
Yeah,
that's crazy and impressive. And I think that's also a really great point, that it shows that those types of movements and feats aren't unachievable just because you love bodybuilding. And if you really don't care about that stuff, well then shit, like just bodybuild. And that's great because you're treating it like a true sport. But now, the argument kind of becomes like, well, which one is better, right? And for me, I think both, and not if then, And
yeah,
so there's going to be a point in my life where maybe I'm like, fuck, I'm just going to go put some mass on this winter and I'm just going to bodybuild, and then see how the rope keeps my
yeah.
body doing what I want to do while putting more tissue mass on and stuff like that. And so I think there's so much to be said about the benefits. I just had a buddy of mine who he's like 5'9", probably 205, 210 pounds, in like the low teens body fat, big dude. and he started rolling the ropes. I've been trying for like the past year to convince him to, and that's the other thing. It's like the hard-headedness I love because I get it, and it's like, what is this fairy looking little rope move gonna do for me, and I love it. I love it. That's awesome. But he finally started doing it. He's like, hey man, I don't know if this happened for anyone else, but like this pinch in my shoulder is totally gone that I've had for the last 4 years of bodybuilding. And it's like, yes, because now you could go train fucking harder because your scap's not winging, because you learned how to move your rib cage and your shoulder around your rib cage a little bit more effectively. And all you had to do was swing a rope around your body for 10 minutes a day as your warm up, and not even get into the flow part and the
Yeah.
sequencing and the stuff that might not be interesting for you. And that's actually more of like the Weck method side of it. So rope flow is kind of exploded into this worldwide movement that is rooted in Weck method, but separated in terms of the application, where people are just getting ridiculous at rope flow as if rope flow is a sport, right? So they're
Yeah.
the tricks and the releases and
Yeah.
the like alpaca, the perfection of the sequencing and the way that there's not a drop of slack in the rope and just everything is perfect. Like that's awesome. But when it comes to bodybuilding, right, it's like you want the athletic carryover of the tool that you're applying. And that's going to be found in the race and chase, overhand, underhand, the Matador's wheel, overhand, underhand, and the dragon roll. You don't even have to get to the sneaks or anything else. That
Yeah.
would be like if a bodybuilder can get that sneak position, like their shoulders are going to be very happy. But they don't have to get there to reap A, the brain benefits of the practice, and B, the spinal engine rotational movement benefits of the practice either. And the other thing that I always suggest with bigger dudes is get a heavy rope
Yeah.
because you guys have so much muscle. You need the feedback to go proximal. If I'm hit, like you're probably what, 205 pounds?
No, oh, Norman, I got a show in 2 weeks. So I'm down to 190 right
Oh, so
now, but
so what do you usually sit at in the off
like
season?
205, 210.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, you put a 1 pound rope in a 205 pound man's hands who could, like, we had a power lifter at one of the trainings last year. I think he could box squat like 600 pounds or something, like a big dude. And we gave him the RMT rope, and that thing weighs like a pound.
No.
And it's like it was just like he's just flicking around a little stick. And one
Yeah.
of the girls there had a 6 pound,
Oh, that's a big one.
inch girthy
Yeah.
rope. And then what that input gave him was it got him out of the distal and allowed him to understand that all of this rope flow movement we want happening from the anterior obliques and the lumbar lat fascia. And because he finally had weight, he was getting the weight shift and he was getting that short side, long side reciprocation. And he actually felt what the benefits of the practice would give someone who maybe isn't as strong or anything, but he got the movement quality down way quicker under more load than with less because he was just so damn strong. Like if you see Juji, right? He's swinging around these monster ropes from Pablo's company, Winding Ropes.
Yeah.
And so that's
Yeah, I
something
got
I
the baby
also
shark.
suggest.
I
Yeah,
do feel
yeah.
it. Yeah, I do feel like I can connect a little bit better to.
Yeah, yeah, you're too strong for the 1 pound stuff. You're way too strong for that. So that's another side note in terms of anyone who might find interest in the practice from this interview. Like get a heavy rope. And if you wanted to, I mean, like the battle rope type material, like if that's cut short enough to like 8 feet, I mean, you could just throw some athletic tape on that. It's not gonna be comfortable in your hands. You'll get a nasty forearm
Yeah.
workout, but you'll get that feedback, and it's just this, learning how to move the rope around the body without having to jump through it. And what that does is it just creates this toe to head and back down, left and right, up and down integration that's just going to make you move more athletically, move more with
And you'll be a
weight
little more
shift.
precise with it, heavier with it.
Yeah.
Difference if you get off a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I've smacked myself in every part of my body with the rope and fast and it hurts, but yeah, definitely it just gives you the feedback that matches the strength that you guys have.
Yeah, I think a lot of bodybuilders benefited from it if they would like to do it as a form of cardio because it's
Yeah.
like it's low intensity, right? And I think there's some benefits parasympathetic nervous system wise, which
Totally.
we always need. And like I said, it's just so great for mobility. Like most bodybuilders are just so stuck in this full extension patterning that
Yes.
they don't have any rotational ability at all. And doing that is like you said, sometimes doing that on its own, that's all you need. And then you teach your body, okay, now I don't have to live there. I have other options. And I like to use it a lot, like I mentioned before, as like a diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
Let me know, like if, like I'm sure everyone who does ropes aware, you got like one side, one thing's that a little bit smoother than when you switch it over. And sometimes I can do the rope and like it'll fix itself. And then sometimes I'm so off, I'll do an inhibition move and then I'll go back to the rope and then now I've got it really good. But the rope told me I was so off because normally I can
Yes.
get into there really well. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think the rope's really awesome. And I kind of started doing the rope and the Weck kind of at the same time I got into like the PRI stuff, which,
Oh,
you know,
cool.
because there's a lot of like both sides utilize like overlap on that. And I think that's really good because a lot of people, like you said, a lot of people don't connect to their left lat. We're more right side dominant. And so a lot of times I'll sit on that left side and try to connect to that a little better. And then maybe I'll rotate a little bit. Every time I'm on the right side, I'm rotating to the left and I'm staying on the left a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So I think there's tons of cool ways to implement it. And I love the clubs too. Are you a fan of
Yeah.
the RMT
Yeah.
clubs?
Absolutely, man. The great part about the RMT club is it gives you a weightedness that you can project and stop short because of the shifting weight of it. And you don't have to deal with like any kind of decelerative forces because the second that those beads chamber to that other side, you can
Mhm.
just rip that thing right back. And that's another great diagnostic tool. I don't know if you ever used it in terms of patterning where it's like, can a person keep the beads quiet?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus are they making noise at certain parts where you know you're kind of losing that chain of momentum and now you gotta be like, okay, well, if it's sticking here and it's dropping, and then let's work on some flexion based stuff or whatever it might be, right? So that's another great diagnostic tool, and I love that you use the rope as a diagnostic tool because that's something that we actually get into more of in the level 2 course, in the WMQ with the Weck method qualified course. And something that actually might benefit you really well. Have you messed with and this was actually in, I think, level 3 of my course, where we're like, let's say we're just taking an overhand matadors and we're due south. Like, you stay south with your body, but you try and cut it to like southeast. So now the
Yeah,
rope is
yeah.
oriented this way. And then can you get it all the way west where one's sitting behind you, one's cutting across, and then the other side? So that's a great way for those left right imbalances to be kind of revealed with that intercardinal kind of play with the rope, where someone might just be like slapping their leg on every beat. They try and turn like a degree off to the right, and then you can scale that back to where it doesn't hang out there, right? And then push it forward. Oh, all of a sudden you're not hitting your leg. Let's push it further, further, further.
You get
And
that
then,
immediate feedback if you're fucking
yeah,
up.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's like a
Squirrel one.
self-correcting code in
Yeah.
the rope. Yeah, yeah, it's pretty cool.
I'm not very good at I think it's the squirrel. What is it behind the back? That's where I got stuck.
Oh,
I knock myself in the face every time I do that thing.
yeah, yeah. The cheetah tail is
Get it out. Yeah, I think that's
it's
it.
just a ton of shoulder mobility, because if you're going to be doing that, like, you basically need to be able to get both hands to clear your hip.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to have to like really shift out of the way, and then it just gets awkward. And that's where, if you do shift, well, now your head's going to gonna
Hard.
be right there. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. But that's a great one. And that one's kind of like this retraction, but then also a lot of dynamic range with that retraction. But then you're also like, yeah, it's an interesting combination of shoulder positions.
It's just so rewarding when you get like
Hard.
one right. You're like, oh yes. I
Yeah, there's a
wasn't recording
dopamine
shit.
hit. Yeah, there's a big dopamine hit for sure. Yeah, and it can be addictive. And I think that's why the practice has really exploded, is because it just makes people feel really good. There's this lady out there. Her name on Instagram is Mother Rope, and she had like hyper mobility and a bunch of other stuff that she couldn't figure out. And she has this device that she wears on her head that can measure brainwave activity. And so she did a test where, like, she sat down in a silent meditation and it recorded. And are you familiar with like the 4 brainwave states?
Kinda.
Yeah. So
Theta.
yeah, exactly. So we got alpha, which is like me right now, engaged. I just had some caffeine. I have a little nicotine going on. Very like aware of the environment. And too much alpha could be like fight flight, right?
Yeah.
That's pushing you over the edge. Beta is kind of like this relaxed but aware, but still more on the aware side. So that might be like, maybe more like dropping into a little bit of a flow state, but you're still pretty critical in terms of where your brain is at. And then you have theta, which is like the sweet spot of flow, where you're no longer like so critical and you're more so present. And like the way that I like to put it is like you become your body more than you live in your brain in theta. So you're just kind of like here. And that's where a lot of positive creative aspects come in. That's where you can really drop into some flow states for productivity and learning and skill
And
acquiring
they
and
say
all
that's
that
true
stuff.
happiness too.
Yeah, I think happiness is a fleeting emotion that gets conflated with contentment, which is the long-term pursuit of um, what's it called? Dispassion, right? Where it's like
Mm,
it's not this I need to chase the ecstasis of happiness because it's never forever, but it's more like how can I develop a level of contentment in shitty scenarios and then, really latch onto that joy in better places, but not let the emotional state dictate the contentment. Just my little side piece on
yeah,
that.
that's
But
cool.
but theta is the flow state for sure, and then delta is like deep sleep. You're unconscious. You can't be really tapping into that unless you're like a super practiced monk or yogi or something like that, and actually have awareness about you. And so what she found was in like a 20-minute time span, she had say I think it was like 15% theta, and then 85% alpha and beta in her seated meditation, and she picked up the rope and did the same thing, and she had like a 80% readout of theta, but you're moving,
Yeah.
right? And so that's why before every workout I pick up the rope, not because I'm like using it as a skill acquisition anymore. I mean, there's some things that I play with now, but I've put in millions of reps where it's just like there now. And I push speed now as my main practice, but like I just know I'm setting my physiology and the state of my brain up in a better, more present, more embodied position for the hard training than I would be without it. So it's become indispensable for me as a tool for clients, right? Like I don't know what they're walking into my session, right? Maybe they just, had an argument or got off a long day of work or whatever. It's like the rope is going to drop you in. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take. And the more you visit that flow state, the more you visit that practice that you know is going to drop it, because it's an outside in thing. Like meditation is an inside out process. Rope flow is an outside in process in terms of how it's going to impact the brain and the psychology. You can't get away from your hemispheres firing like crazy by consistently crossing your midline with your hands, because your sensory and motor cortex care so much about your hands that they're like 40 times larger than the rest of your body in terms of how much nervous system kind of innervation is in the hands, right? And that's how we do our work. That's how we're in the world, is with our hands. And so if you could stimulate these things to stimulate this guy, in which the sensory input is going to dictate the motor output, like why wouldn't you do that? It's like you're taking a drug for focus basically just by
Yeah.
swinging a fucking rope around your body.
It's weird how it's so satisfying.
Yeah,
Even when you're not
yeah.
that good. Like you said, if you can just do like the basic stuff, like it's like I have a lot of clients like they hate it, and then they get one like, oh shit, this is awesome actually. Like I'll just have them walking, doing the little
Yeah,
side to
yeah.
side. And so a lot of the WEC, so with the rope, it's a lot of the RMT and stuff like that, and then obviously a lot of core training. I see your stuff. You do a lot of that. I want to talk a little bit about the bilateral training in the WEC method, because
Yeah.
as far as I understand, pretty much all of the bilateral moves you guys do, you have what you call external torsion, right, or internal
And
torsion.
both, yeah. So both. And so that's a great question, and this is where the bodybuilder is going to have, and the power lifter as well, is going to have the most insight to creating a language to describe a type of tension and an exploitation of a line of tension within a given lift. So with I kind of have to break down coiling core, rotational,
Yeah,
and
that's good.
bilateral just to kind of structure the information well so someone who's never heard of this before can
Yeah.
understand. So coiling core is based on spinal engine theory, which is the idea that your spine is not this somewhat passive, simply designed for structure and transmission of force from, legs to arms, or legs or arms or whatever, but it's actually a source of force. And so the segmentation and the movement of the spine can be manipulated and positioned or utilized in a way that's going to exploit greater global tensioning and integrity throughout the body. So what a coil is in terms of like anatomical terms, it's going to be rotation, lateral flexion, and then a bias, which makes it internal or external, of either extending into that one side or flexing into that one side. And similar to what I stood up and showed with the rope, we have primarily the anterior external obliques on the front and that lumbodorsal lat fascia that we're looking at in terms of external torsion being the lats. We could think Superman chest. You could think back squat. You could think powerlifting style bench press. And then we have internal torsion, which is going to be that kind of turtle shell back. That would be something like a lat spread in a bodybuilding pose, although sometimes you guys extend up at the top. It all depends on the structure and whatnot. But the way that you could think of that would be like an Olympic muscle up, right? Where you're like doing your pull up, but you're here and then you're pushing over the top, and like there's no wrinkles on the back of the shirt in internal torsion. You can think of Zerker lifts. You can think of stone lifts. You could think of like a planche if anyone's familiar with the hardcore calisthenics type stuff. And you make that one-sided, right? And that one-sidedness I look at as a spectrum, basically. So we have coiling core, which is getting the most amount of rotation on one side at a time and getting that tension so short that the other side is potentiated in as much length as possible. Then I hit the other side. So I'm on the right post on the right, I'm on the left post on the left. And every time I visit that tension, the capacity and the spectrum of your rotation goes further. The goalposts get wider. Now, rotational movement requires some kind of a weight shift, right? So that would be a coil to the opposing side coil. So if I think about throwing a punch, right, I'm likely going to load up, I'm going to shift, and then I'm going to send my hook. If I'm thinking about throwing a ball, I'm going to drop, and then I'm going to send it over the top, right? And so rotational movement is inherently very athletic. It has that weight shift and it has that long side, short side reciprocation where we're tensioning and loading and then springing and then receiving it onto the other side. Now, bilateral torsion is
Real quick, I'm sorry. While
yeah,
we're on the rotational stuff,
sure.
I do think that some of this is so natural, right? That's what's great. Like a lot of bodybuilders, they do that for their lats. They're just intuitive enough where they
Yeah.
feel that rotation on a pull like that, just naturally because it's just so short and it feels so good. And I was curious too, like when you're training your people online or just in general, what are some of the mistakes or you see when people they're trying to do coiled core or
Yeah,
RMT?
sure. That's a great question. The most general kind of beginner mistake is going to be remaining very like bunchy up in the shoulder or twisty, right? So
Yeah,
a
that's what I see.
coil is going to be again rotation and lateral flexion. So there has to be a height difference in the shoulders. And then internal torsion is going to be where the shoulder remains in front of the hip. External torsion is going to be where the shoulder gets behind the hip. So a lot of times the pec minor is a big culprit in terms of someone's inability to access external torsion. And they're going to try and find it, but they're going to be way like just stuck up top where we need this shoulder to get down and back and away from the ear. And that's going to be the thing that helps you tune into your lats. The secondary thing is just going to be like dumping their neck over and
Position,
losing the differentiation between the shoulders, because if I have a short side on one side, I actually want my neck long. So I always want my eyes on a target. And we could think about this a little bit more at like our primal nature, where like if I'm playing ice hockey, I need my head up. And if I'm turning a corner, I don't want to be here. I need to be here so I could have my eyes and my head in a level field where I'm going to get the best input of the visual surroundings, and vestibular where I like my head is on center and I actually know where gravity is placing my body. And so a lot of times you just see this kind of like big dump into the side here. And that's something that is easily fixed just by cueing short side, long neck, short side, long neck. It's got to be there, right?
About
So I
foot
was,
contacts, I would say I see a lot of issues sometimes. You
yeah,
see them
yeah,
getting that right internal rotation, they're coiling core over there real good, and then maybe they go to the left and like the foot contacts are kind of going wonky. They're wanting to just
yeah,
rotate
yeah,
out.
sure, sure. Yeah, a lot of it, again, it's shoulders over hips. So that relationship is going to dictate how deep into the coil you can get. A lot of time it's just duration of exposure. And the other thing that we really like to talk about is the idea that the shape doesn't necessarily define if they're internal or external. So someone's internal and external might look a little bit different than like what it would be textbook. But what we want to try and do is get them to feel the quadrant that we're looking for, experience that sensation, trust that sensation, and then based on where their body's at with any potential limitations or not, amplify that sensation. And then over time, a lot of what happens in the kind of cleanup process of the position is just experiencing it, where one day maybe they're there, the next day they can get their shoulder even lower, and then maybe eventually they realize like, oh, I could play with my hip too to get more out of my lat. And then the hip is going to inform the foot position, and then all of a sudden, 6 months later they have a perfect forward angle and spine shin congruency and everything that we talk about in terms of really like nailing that type of one-sided tension. So yeah, I would say those are kind of the main big things.
Thanks.
But like when I made a post the other day of like the first time I ever coiled, and I was like this. I was like,
Yeah.
turned, and I wasn't even, but I did it. And
Yeah.
like for me, I don't expect anything to ever be perfect. I like to chase perfection, knowing that it'll never be perfect. But just doing it and like feeling like how much of your lat is your hip and how much of your oblique is your hip on the front side. Like those two sensations can really do a lot for anyone who's very, somatic in their type of personality, which anyone who a bodybuilder like inherently is.
Yeah.
You're a tangible physical learner type person. So if you can get that person to feel it where we want it, like just run with that sensation and make it as amplified and as intense as you can, and let that sink into your nervous system. And then the next time you do a row, or the next time you do maybe a single arm press, you're going to be like, oh, like I get it now. And then you can exploit that and, reap the benefits of it. So to get back to bilateral torsion, it's really cool because we could think about it as a coil, actually, right? So if we think about coiling core, we're talking about left and right. And that anchoring of the short side is going to be the coil. Now with bilateral torsion, it's now front and back. Where is the front line our technical coil, internal torsion, where that's the short side? Or is the back line, the back chain, is that going to be our short side, which makes it the external torsion? And then the athletic transition, or the RMT of bilateral, is the alternation of a movement that starts in internal bilateral and ends in external bilateral. So to give you 3 lifts, we have a back squat, right? Low bar back squat is my favorite back squat. I can wedge that sucker in. I'm all in the lats. I don't want to lose that at all, because if not, it's going to rip my wrists back, or I'm going to round my shoulders over, and that's going to be very uncomfortable. Internal torsion squat is going to be our Zerker squat. I have to be in my obliques. I have to have my lats long. I have to be here. I can't be here. I can't pull that bar behind through my rib cage, right? So that's our internal squat pattern. Now, if we want to take an athletic transition of a squat type pattern, we could think of I like the stone to shoulder analogy of it. It's a deadlift and it's a squat and it's a whatever, but just in terms of the idea of a bilateral athletic transition. If I pick the stone up, I'm rounded, I'm rounded, I'm rounded. I have it on my lap now. If I want to get that into my shoulder, onto my shoulder, I have to come from global flexion rooted into the obliques, being internal, and roll that sucker up and come into all that extension and root down into my lats to get that thing on my shoulder, which then it becomes a coiled movement
Little
once it's
coil,
on the
yeah.
shoulder. Yeah, once it's on the shoulder. It's technically a backside coil on that one because this is your long side and this is your short side, right? So differentiation once it's on the shoulder. But to get it there, we need that athletic or bilateral version of RMT in order to get it up there. You can think of like a broad jump, right? They're hollowed, they're Superman in midair, and then they send their feet out right at the end to get as far away from them as they can so they can get their feet in the sand at the furthest point. So that's internal to jump, external midair, and then they curl it back into internal right as they land. And so
Can you
that's
do pretty
where,
much any movement as a internal external torsion,
yeah,
like a foot
maybe,
press?
yeah, maybe not in the same like line of tension. Like, you know, for a shoulder press, for example, we could hit like an axle bar press. You have to be external because you need the extended hand, you need your chest underneath you, and you got to send it up here. But if we think of like a maybe more of a free type of overhead dumbbell press, if I can get straight up, you know, now I'm a little bit more internal because I'm not back here. I'm not
Maybe like a
here.
landmine or something, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, landmine U is almost all internal, especially the way Alex coaches it when you first learn it. But you can manipulate it, but that's nerdier stuff that is kind of down the road. But yeah, so and if you notice with Alex's cues with landmine U, it's like bruise your hip, bruise the front of your hip. That's your oblique. That's your internal torsion line. That's your rounded, you know, no wrinkles on the back of the shirt. And when you catch the landmine and you're clean, like you want the bones of your hip.
Yeah.
If I got 4 plates and a 25 on it, I need my bones, right? I don't want to be on the side of my body where my elbow's just going to get ripped back by all that weight. And
But is
there's
there a time where you would go just neutral? I know Weck's not really big on it. It seems like everything's here or there, which is good because most bodybuilders, right, where they just live in external torsion, like they don't have any of that. So you're definitely bouncing it out. But is there any benefit that you would see to just stay neutral for something?
Yeah, I don't think you can be neutral technically, right? Like
Yeah.
if the bar's on my back, I have to extend. Like Chris Chamberlain, he has a theory about pec tears, pec minor tears, right? If I'm wedged into my lats, that means pec minor's long. And if I lose that press halfway and I flip to internal, all of that load is hitting pec minor. It's hitting bicep. It's hitting front delt now, right? So it's like that rapid shift of torsion line is the rapid shift of tension in the body in which that tissue is not ready to contract that fast under that much load. And
So is it always, I'm sorry, is it always a maximum like external torsion, or sometimes you're like, let's just
no,
hit a
no,
little
no, no.
bit? Okay.
Yeah. And that's where we really love showing the extremes in like a training because again, similar to that kind of spectrum or goalpost analogy, if I have more left and more right, that means I have more rotational capacity between those 2 points. And I also have more center in those points as well, where I could find these little micro adjustments where maybe I don't want to be like completely extended and poke my butt out on a back squat. Like maybe I want to like do something a little bit differently, but I know I'm still primarily rooted externally.
Okay.
And so it's more like a process of differentiating and strategizing movement where we're looking for the most output with the least input, which gives you technically more output as a like a net objective value, right? Because if I could bench press with bad form 225, and then now I actually have something proximal to root into, well, maybe I could put 20 pounds on that bench press overnight just because the tensioning is more efficient. not because my muscles actually grew stronger to a degree that I could bench 20 pounds more overnight, but it's just like this efficiency system that gets turned on where now you're better because you can feel more, you could structure more, you could organize more. And so that's where with bodybuilding, right? Like certain poses, and I've actually been using bodybuilding posing as like an isometric upper body
Oh,
practice.
nice.
And I've been absolutely loving it because I love lower body isometrics, which are very like they feel very athletic in terms of the way that I position myself. But then I'm like, what about like upper body isos? And so like I'll just get in a mirror behind me and I'll have my phone up in front of me and I'll just be like, how can I get my left lat looking like what is it, my ribs? Is
Yeah.
it this muscle? Is it that muscle? And like because for me, with all the injuries and everything, when I would pose, it would be like if you cut me in half, you got like two different bodies, you know? And that always pissed me off, which is also a part of why bodybuilding just didn't work out for me. It created this like really negative feedback loop in my
Yeah.
brain, like kind of like approaching training as a means to like punish myself for how how asymmetrical I was, you know? Um, and so, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of aspects of bodybuilding that I still keep in my training. I still hit the big three lifts. Deadlifts are something that have never felt good for me in long periods of implementing them.
You
But right
probably have
now,
those fucking flashbacks, those PTSD.
dude, I'm actually using it as a means to recover from that. Like I know I could deadlift more than 400 pounds, but the second I get to 385, like I could squat more than I could bench than I could deadlift. And that's a very rare thing. But it's just I don't have that trauma that I have in the deadlift that I have
Yeah.
on the squat. And so I'm actually using the deadlift right now to like trust my body, you know, and like I'm like the second I hit 405, I feel like there's gonna be like this new Edward that emerges through, you know.
So what does your programming look like then? Like obviously you're not like on a bodybuilder split. Like how many days a week do you go and how do you split up for just for yourself personally?
Yeah, yeah. Um, and if anyone's interested in training with me and seeing what I do, I have my community on School, which is just my exact workouts, my main
Oh,
five
cool.
strength workouts every week. That's you could find that at train.etstrength.com. That'll take you to the landing page. And so for me, I do keep the classic push pull legs vibe. Um, so I do push Monday, pull Tuesday. I have a lower body session on Wednesday. I do snatches and accessory work on Thursdays, and then I have another lower body on Friday. So the way that I organize it though, there's really not one day that doesn't include my full body to some extent,
Yeah, that's
right?
what I was wondering.
So like on my push day, I use the landmine clean and jerk as my primary strength exercise. But that's requiring a ton of leg drive and it has some pull in it to get it off the ground and into
Yeah.
that clean position, right? But I'll emphasize the push intent. So like maybe I'll hit one clean and then I'll do 3 reps of the jerks on that day or whatever it might be. And then and then the way that I like to structure my training in general is RMT first, bilateral movement after that, and then I have a selection of either RMT or coiling core movements that I'll finish off with. And for me, the perfect ratio is just simply like the perfect ratio for my goals, where I want to be as athletic as possible and as strong as possible. I want to be rotating and coiling more than I am bilateral. But the
Yeah.
bilateral has a ton of benefit to my overall structure. So I'm not going to avoid it. Right. So I'll hit my bench press after my clean and jerks. On my pull day, for example, my pull days, because I hit the landmine clean on my push, I start off with just a lot of heavy kettlebell cleans and hand to hand cleans because that's all lats and that's so much just posterior engagement. But again, if I'm getting an 80 kilo kettlebell up into my arm and I'm fucking 76 kilos, like I need to use so much of my body to get that up. But it's still primarily I'm pulling the weight up from the ground, right? And then I'll hit my deadlift or stone lift or zerker or something like that, bilateral after that. And then I'll hit some rows and some variations and pull downs and whatever else after that. My first lower body day of the week is usually a kettlebell based lower body day. So I'll hit some complexes with like, I'll two hand clean it so I'm not like exhausting the clean. So I have some set up there, but then I'll, do some lunges, or I'll do some goblet squats with, my 80 or my 92 kilo bell. And so that would be almost like a front squat internal torsion, kind of emphasis on the bilateral work on Wednesday. I always hit a ton of isometrics each week. I do a lot of athletic based lower body movement. I do some joint mobilization type work and stuff like that. Thursdays, I have my landmine U snatch and my kettlebell snatches. Either it's same hand or hand to hand, or all three of them, where it's, landmine, hand to hand, and single hand snatches. And then just like upper body accessory type work. And then Friday, as of late, has been my back squat day. So like today I did, and again, the way that I look at these axial loaded lifts is more like a pressure management gauge rather than like I'm trying to objectively get my squat stronger. Like I want over time, right now we're like 385 feels, 365, 385 feels. I want that feeling at 405. And I'm not going to get to that place until that pressure feels like where 365 is too easy now. It's like, okay, let's, but I'm not like very linear in it because certain weights are going to feel heavier than others. And then like I'll do a bunch of jumps and stuff. Like today I did some jumping, I did some lateral bounding. But the way that I really look at my training is I'm developing attributes through the means of strength training. Right. So with the big bilateral pull and squat, like I'm developing a capacity to manage pressure vertically. With the landmine work, I'm developing a capacity to be super explosive with a forward intent and a rotational capacity. With the heavy kettlebells, it's grip and tendon strength for my upper body. It's triple extension from bilateral positions in the lower body. It's pressure management when I have those big bells up on my shoulder, right? It's like I look at kettlebells as a very thickening type training tool, not necessarily a mass builder, depending on how you use it, but like it just, I've never felt more dense than since I started swinging heavy bells. And then the lower body, it's more like, okay, I want front side squatting patterns. I want backside squatting patterns. I want unilateral rotational patterns. I want fast movement. So I'll hit some sprints. This Wednesday, instead of my lower body workout, I went on the ice and I just did some fucking
cool.
badass sprints and technique work on skates, and then Saturdays I usually just like hit the punching bag and do some core and hang out a little bit. It's my lower intensity day. And then Sundays is the day that God rested, so I must as well.
Yeah.
So I need one full day off a week.
Yeah, for sure. That's a lot of, I mean, I'm sure you had to build up to that. A lot of people obviously couldn't handle that amount of volume starting off for sure.
Yeah, and the volume that I do is also
Yeah. How long are
pretty,
your workouts?
like an hour and 15. And because it's very rotational and full body oriented, I don't feel the intense nervous system fatigue of like really just trashing a particular muscle group each day. Where I always play the volume to like a daily check-in, which I have some freedom with, right? Like how well did I sleep? Did my kid wake up in the middle of the night? Am I stressed for whatever reason? And then I accommodate either the load, the intensity, or the volume to that sensation, because that will keep me in the game for the long term rather than just being like, well, I benched 235 for this many reps last Monday. Like that means 240 today for the same reps. And I've always just gotten fucked over like that in my own training. So I have a structured but unstructured approach in terms of exercise selection. I always leave room for question marks and side quests and other shit that I want to just, can I kettlebell press with the palm, where the bell is in my palm, like, can I actually do that?
It's supposed to be fun,
Yeah, yeah. It keeps me fresh and it keeps me engaged and happy and progressing and progressing through like enough variety that I don't feel like I'm getting locked into any one particular strategy.
Is there anything that like you program like differently or you have different opinions on, or you do differently than like standard Weck stuff? Like how do you, what is something of yours that you blend into your training style?
No, not really. And the reason being, and the reason that I have such an affinity for David's work and everything that I've done, with them, and as a coach that coaches Weck method, and as a coach that coaches what I do. In terms of my personal work, I do whatever the person wants from me and needs from me to a degree that keeps it fun for them and progressive for them. And it's all done through the lens of torsion, spinal engine theory, coiling core, rotational movement, bilateral torsion, because it applies to every person in every sport in every phase of their life. Like, there's ways to progress it and regress it to infinite and infinitesimal degrees. There's ways to load it infinitely. And there's ways to take a corrective exercise and just add in a little sprinkle of positional tension that's, torsion related or whatever, and all of a sudden it becomes more biomechanically advantageous.
Mm.
So it's not that I do anything that's like different or um, goes against anything. It's just I've found it to be so true fundamentally that anything I do, any exercise, any person that's in front of me, anything I want to explore, somehow finds a way to root back through position, through language, through tension, through whatever it might be, to what he has laid out in his system. And that's really where I'm in it, because I've just found it so valuable, and there's really no downsides to it, because it's such an open door, right? It's like, hey, here's 3 primary principles that you could fit every exercise under the sun in. Like, go exploit it and figure it out and have fun with it and add what's uniquely yours. Like, that's David's biggest thing. And that's one of the things that differentiates Weck method from any of these other functional systems, is that David wants you to take it and be Jonathan Warren bodybuilder with it. He wants me to take it and be Edward Troise, whatever the fuck I could label myself as, and that's also why I really, it feels like a family thing, where it's like, if you go train Weck
He's the
method,
crazy uncle.
yeah. Yeah, if you go train Weck method with me, you're going to get a little bit of a different flavor, but it's all the same thing. If you train it with Chris, he's got his strong suits. If you train it with my buddy Adam, he's got his strong suits. And that gives me a sense of freedom within myself too, where I don't feel like I have to be this carbon
Yeah.
copy of someone. And it's not just that, but it's also appreciated, and it's actually like that's what they want. So it's been an awesome, I owe David a lot for sure.
Yeah.
For
Well, you
what
guys
he's
are
done for
also,
me. And
spreading his stuff, so I'm sure he's appreciative as well. You
yeah,
and
yeah,
what's
yeah.
the guy's name? Keanu? What's
Yeah,
the
Keanu's a
big
gorilla,
big
bro.
fucking
He is.
dude?
That
Yeah.
guy impresses me every single post that he makes.
Monster. Yeah, and obviously Chris is just a fucking monster too. So you guys are
Yeah,
obviously good examples of what you can do with this. So I mean, I'm sure you guys have a lot to thank for him, but you guys are helping him get the word out as well, man.
yeah, of course, and he would rather us do it than him in some ways,
Yeah.
because it makes it more relatable to more people, because it's still the same information. It's just like, what did Keanu do with it? If I want to put some mass on, I'm probably going to go talk to Keanu.
Yeah.
If I want to go lift the heaviest kettlebells in the world, I'm probably going to go hang out with Tom DeJulie.
Yeah.
I don't know if you follow Tom on
I'll check
Instagram.
him out. Yeah,
Oh my, Tom Degiuli. He's the kindest, humble dude, just an absolute freakazoid. I'm
those are the
chasing
best.
him with all my kettlebell stuff. I have to remind him. I'm like, bro, you got 30 pounds on me. Like, just remember that.
Been doing it for a while. Well, awesome, man. We covered a lot of ground. Is there anything you want to go over at all before we take off? Anything you think we
No,
missed?
man, this was a great time. It was
Awesome.
awesome to get to meet you, bro, and get to know you a
Yeah,
little bit.
appreciate it. Yeah,
I know.
you didn't know I had your rope course. Yeah, you're the one that got me into it, and
Yeah,
I think it
well,
helps that I've got some muscle when I do it, because otherwise
yeah,
I do feel like I'd be like people like what the fuck is this? But they see me like, oh, it's kind of jacked. There must be something to it.
yeah, and I like, something I think I started a tangent on, and then digressed, was a large part of my goals, like currently in terms of my personal practice. It's it's in hopes of inspiring strong guys like yourself to like try just enough of some perceived weird shit but then get better at what you love doing still. Like I couldn't convince too many people if I was, not impressively
Yeah.
strong. And so not that it's a selfish desire to, be some kind of thing. I've always had an inspiration to help people and inspire and motivate people.
Yeah, this is the best job in the world, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And so if I could do that, someone like you, bro, I'm doing a job
Yeah,
pretty
man.
well done. So I
Everybody's got
appreciate you
something to
supporting me,
teach. You
bro.
got a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
absolutely, absolutely,
Awesome.
absolutely, bro.
Cool. I'll put your links below. Like I said, you're the course I got. I love your rope course. I definitely recommend it. And anything else you want to drop? You said they can go to your website and they can see your
Yeah,
training
yeah,
there.
yeah. So my website is etstrength.com. That's where my rope flow course is currently being hosted. But train.etstrength.com is the landing page for my school community that has my daily workouts there.
Nice.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
that's just $20 a month. And you just get, a video each day of all the exercises. I do a voiceover and explain it. And then I also have a couple videos of my rope flow foundations course in that community. And I also have an exercise library in there with some more specific stuff. So it's
Nice.
being built up over time. So there'll be a lot of good stuff in there over the next couple months.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for so much you do. Good chat, man. Good to learn a lot about you. I think a lot of
Yeah,
people
likewise,
be
Jonathan.
like this. All right. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, brother.
Have a good one, man.
Later.